Hi everyone, welcome to Learning Impact. In today's lecture, we will discuss biography of Karl Marx. We will talk about his educational background, family background, and also we will talk about his political philosophy in brief. So let's start. Okay, first is that who was Karl Marx? We will go through his introduction. Karl Marx was born in 1818 and was died in 1883. So the time era of the Karl Marx was from 1818 to 83. Karl Marx was born in Germany. The former name of Germany was Prussia, so we can say that he was born in Prussia, and he was born in the city which was known as Trier. His family background was a middle class family. He was from the middle class family, and his father was a successful lawyer who was also he was also expecting him to become a lawyer, and he was from the Jewish family. At the time when he was born, this was the era which was at the time when the anti-Semitism was at peak. So to avoid the rise of anti-Semitism, both parents of the Karl Marx, they converted from Jewish to Christianity when Marx was only 6 years old. This is all about the brief introduction of Karl Marx. Now we will discuss his educational background. Karl Marx did his schooling from a grammar school in Texas. He attended university. The initial university training was from the University of Bonn 1835 to study law. And then later on, he switched from law to philosophy, and he joined a university which was University of Berlin. It was in Germany, and this university was profoundly influenced by the Hegelian philosophy. So when he joined that university, he came under the influence of that philosophy, and there is a reflection of the Hegelian philosophy in his political views. It was because that he attended this University of Berlin. So he switched from law to philosophy in this university, and then later on he completed his PhD in philosophy from University of Jena in 1841 when he was only 23 years old when he completed his doctorate in philosophy. So these were the three universities which he attended. These all are at Germany. The University of Bonn is also in Germany, where he started his study in law, and then later on he converted to University of Berlin, where he switched from law to philosophy, and then he completed his PhD from University of Jena when he was only 23 years old. Okay, now what was his occupational history? When we look at his occupational background, we come across that the first occupation which he got, it was the journalism. Although his father was wanting him to be a successful lawyer and he was himself interested in teaching, but he ended up becoming as a journalist. And the first position which was offered to him, that was as editor-in-chief in 1842, and the newspaper in which he became editor-in-chief, that was the Rani Zeitung. And this was the newspaper which was the liberal radical newspaper in Cologne of Germany. This newspaper was famous for the liberal radical views, which was in Cologne of Germany. Cologne is a city in Germany. But after when Marx joined this newspaper as an editor-in-chief, this newspaper was shut down by the government at that time, because much of the Marx writings, they annoyed the government of that time, because much of the Marx writings were viewed as radical by the government of that time. So this newspaper was then shut down. This was his brief occupational history, that he became editor-in-chief in 1842. He worked in this newspaper, and he was interested in teaching. His father was wanting him to be a lawyer, but he became a journalist. Okay, so this was all about his occupational history. Now, let's discuss his marital life. Karl Marx got married in 1843. It was the same year in which the paper was suppressed, the paper which was shut down because of the Karl Marx radical writings. So in 1843 he got married, and his wife was the Jenny von Westphalen, who was the daughter of the high-ranking civil servants, a member of petty nobility. Karl Marx himself was from the middle class, but his wife was very rich. She was a daughter of the high-ranking civil servant. And okay, then the Karl Marx-Engel friendship. We know that Karl Marx was facing expulsion just because that he was from the Jewish family, although his family converted to Christianity. But as his father, they were by birth they were Jewish family, so they were facing expulsion after expulsion. Marx moved to Paris and he wrote Economic and Philosophic Manuscript in 1844, and this is also known as the Paris manuscript because it was written in Paris. And then he studied economics and also worked for magazine, and it was in Paris where he for the first time met his friend Engel, and the Paris is the capital of France where he met his friend Engel. And this Engel was the son of the textile German industrialist who was also appalled by the misery of the working class. So there's a kind of theoretical orientation between the Marx and Engel, and this leads to different publications which was co-authorized by Marx and Engel. Okay, Engel proved to be not only his friend but also his disciple. He was following his philosophy. They also co-authorized different publications, and also he was a benefactor. As he was from the rich family, he was the son of the textile German industrialist. So whenever Marx was facing financial crisis, Engel was always there to help him. So this was the Marx-Engel friendship that they for the first time met in Paris, and they were for the different publications. Now, what were these publications on which Marx and Engel they worked together? These publications include some co-authorized publications with Engel of the Marx was the Holy Family in 1845, and the Holy Family was the publication which was written by the Karl Marx and Engel both together. It is known as the Critique of the Critical Criticism also, and this content of this Holy Family was more focusing to criticize the young Hegelians for their abstract and speculative approach to philosophy and the social issues. And it was also focusing on the materialist conception of history, means that they study some materialist contradictions that exist in history, in the economic structures when we look at history. And they argue that the social and the historical developments, they are driven by the material conditions and the economic factors rather than the abstract ideas. The Hegelian philosophy was focusing more on ideas and the abstract ideas. They were speculating different things. But in case of the Karl Marx and Engel, when they were co-authorizing the Holy Family, they criticized their method, and they were themselves adopting more practical approach. And they were also arguing that religious belief is a form of alienation. They also criticized religion, that they contend that the religion actually reflects the material condition and the social relations of society, and the true human emancipation require overcoming the religious illusions, because religion make people believe that these all hardships and these all are predetermined by God. So they lack the motivation to work to improve themselves. And also they talk about the human emancipation. They assert that social and political liberation cannot be achieved through philosophical critique alone, but there is a requirement of practical applications, practical actions to change the material conditions. Means that we don't have to focus more on the abstract ideas, but have to focus to take more practical actions to change our social condition. This is all what they discuss in the Holy Family, which was published in 1845. Then the other publication was the German Ideology, which was also co-authorized by the Karl Marx and Engel. And this German ideology much of the content of the German ideology was associated with the historical materialism. They argue about the material conditions of society, the economic structure and the modes of production, including all aspects of life like politics, culture, and ideology. And they also introduced the economic determinism concept, the concept in which the base it determined the superstructure. The base and the superstructure, the base is the economic foundation of society, and superstructure is a political, legal, and an ideological institution that arise from and serve the base. The base and the superstructure model was also presented in the German ideology. And this publication was also critique of the ideology. They were believing that ideology is a set of the false beliefs and ideas that mask the true conditions and interests of the ruling class. Means that much of the ideology that prevail is mostly those ideologies that favor the ruling class. So what the workers do, that they follow this ideology in order to survive in the society, but indirectly they are actually supporting or favoring the ruling class, which in turn leads to the more exploitation of the working class. And also it was a critique of the young Hegelian. And they were believing that the young Hegelian focused more on the abstract idea. This is the same which they also discuss in the Holy Family, and they address the material condition. We have to address the material conditions and the class struggle that shape the society. Then the other content of the German ideology was about the division of labor and the class struggle. Marx and Engels discussed the division of labor as a fundamental aspect of the human history that leads to the class division and exploitation. And they believed that history is driven by the struggle between the classes. And what were these classes? They were the working class, and also the other class was the capitalist class, which was the have and have not class. And what is the struggle about? The struggle is about to overthrow this capitalist class by the working class. And they also talk about the communist society, that there should be the abolition of private property, and there should be the establishment of the classes and the communist society where the means of production will be communally owned by the people of the society. Means that there should be abolishment of all the private ownership. And also they were believing that individuals would freely develop their capacity in a cooperative and non-exploitative environment in case if there is a communism in society. So they were believing that the communist society is the only solution to end the exploitation of the working class. So this the German ideology got published in 1932. Then the other publication is of the Communist Manifesto. Communist Manifesto was also the publication which was co-authorized by Marx and Engels together. And this publication is considered one of the most influential political documents in history because it was outlining the principles of communism, and it was calling for the proletariat to rise against the bourgeoisie. What was the content of the Communist Manifesto about? It was introducing the Communist Manifesto begins with the famous declaration that a spectre is haunting Europe, that is the spectre of communism. Means that they called for a unified effort among the communists across Europe to counter the negative perception attack for the ruling class. So they were calling for the unification of the working class to overthrow the capitalist class. And this Communist Manifesto was also talking about the bourgeoisie and the proletarian class. Bourgeoisie is a class which was now also known as the have class, and the proletariat is the have not class. So the capitalist class is exploiting the proletarian class. This was all the Communist Manifesto was instilling in minds of the proletariat, that they have to overthrow the capitalist class because they are under their suppression. And they were also they also discussed the need for a communist revolution. Marx and Engels advocate for the abolition of bourgeoisie private property, which they see as the source of exploitation and the class division. And the call of communism is to create a classless society, they believe. They believe that in Communist Manifesto, they also talk about the critique of other socialist and communist literature because they criticize these movements for being idealistic and disconnected from the material conditions and the class struggles of society. And they also talk about some communist goals and immediate demands. What were the demands of this Communist Manifesto? The demands was that there should have abolishment of private property. There should have a progressive or graduated income tax, and there should be a system which believe in the centralization of credit in the hands of the state, and there should be a centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of state, and also the factories and the instruments of production which owned by the state should be extended. There should be equal liability of all to work and establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. There should be a combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, and there should be free education for all children in public schools and abolition of children's factory labor in its present time. And this was all what the Communist Manifesto was demanding, and was instilling in the minds of the proletarian class that they should stick to these demands until these demands get passed by the government. Okay, then the Communist Manifesto show ringing political slogans because it was a kind of political document. So it was raising a slogan that working men of all countries unite, because it was believing that until the working men of all countries it get united, change is possible by the proletarian class. Okay, then what was the Marx and Engels theoretical disorientation? Although we have studied that there was some theoretical orientations between Marx and Engels, and that's why they have some, they co-work together, and also they have some co-authorized publications. But still, at the same time, as they have similarities, but still there are some theoretical disorientations also. And what were these Marx and Engels disorientations? When we look at the Marx, much of the Marx philosophy is theoretical, it is disorderly intellectual. Means that when we look at the Marx philosophy, at some point he talked about one thing, but on the other hand, he then discarded that claim. Means that there is no order or pattern which he follow. So means that there is various interpretations is possible of the Marx philosophy. If one interpret Marx in one way, the other way is also true. The opposite of the Marx interpretation is also true. So it means that there are various interpretations, and this is the reason that it is difficult for the ordinary people to understand the Marx philosophy. And other thing about the Marx is that he shows strong orientation to his family because he believed in a family institution. He gave more importance to family institution. But on the other hand, when we look at the Engels philosophy, he was more practical thinker. He was not more theoretical, like he was believing that they should have practical actions, they should have some practical solutions to the social problems. And when we look at his personality, he was a neat and tidy businessman because he was himself son of the industrialist. So he was more disciplined businessman, and he was disbelieving in family institution. He was not giving much importance to family institution as Marx was giving. So this is some theoretical disorientation which we mostly see in Marx and Engels publications. Although they both have some theoretical disorientation, but still Engels himself has accepted that Marx was genius. Marx was more genius than him. Marx was more broader thinker than him, and it can be reflected from his words, which he said that Marx could very well have done without me. What Marx accomplished, I would not have achieved. Marx stood higher, saw farther, and took a wider and quicker view than the rest of us. Marx was genius. It was something which Engels himself has claimed. Means that although they both have theoretical orientation, that's why they have some co-authorized publications, and at the same time they have some theoretical disorientations, and they both were friends and disciples and co-workers and benefactor. But still, the Engels himself claimed that Marx was far better than him. Marx was genius. He stood higher, he saw farther, he took a wider and a quicker view than the rest of us. And this is the words in which he praised much of the Marx work. This was all about the Marx and Engels friendship, theoretical orientations and disorientations. Okay, now what was the Marx political life and other publications? When we look at the Marx political life, he was facing expulsion after expulsion because of his Jewish identity, and Marx was expelled from France in 1845 at the request of Prussians. Then he moved to Brussels, which was a city in Germany, and he stayed there for 3 years. And then he gained political membership in International Revolutionary Movement. And he was believing that there should have international harmony among the working class. Means that he was not aiming to unite the working class of a particular nation. He was believing that there should have international community of the working class, which should be united at a global level. And it is only in this case that the revolution will be possible. And he associated himself with the Communist League, and he wrote Communist Manifesto for the Communist League in 1848 in London. And although he was politically active, but later on he took a kind of U-turn, and he moved from active revolutionary membership to a serious researcher of capitalist system in 1849. After he gained political membership and he worked in political membership for years, later on he took a U-turn, and he was believing that there should have a serious study of capitalist. There is a need of a serious study of capitalist system rather than to take part in a political movements, because it will not show any impact. It will not cause any impact. We have to study we have to do a detailed study of the capitalist system, then we will be able to understand the cons and pros of this system. And in that way, it is only the possibility that we can overthrow this system. So it was the U-turn which he take. He moved from the active revolutionary movements to the serious researcher. And after, when he did a deep study of the capitalist system, then he moved back to the political life. Okay, so he was facing another expulsion. He moved from Brussels to Cologne. Brussels, where he stayed for 3 years. Then he moved to Cologne, where he stayed briefly, and then he permanently settled in England. And he published there 3 volumes of Capital. That he studied Adam Smith at the British Museum. Adam Smith was one of the classical economists which he studied. And later on, he published his publication, which was known as the Capital. And he was there are 3 volumes of this Capital. First got published in 1867 in Marx's lifetime, and the other 3 publications got published posthumously. Then he rejoined when he did a deep analysis of the capitalist system. Then he rejoins the political life, and he became a member of the International Working Class Movement in 1864. But this movement, it got failed in 1876 along with the other revolutionary movements. This was all about the Karl Marx political life, and now we will discuss his publications. Although Marx have some publications which was co-authorized with Engel, we have discussed that, but there are also some other publications which Karl Marx worked alone on that. Some of the publications which Karl Marx published alone include the 11 Theses on Feuerbach. This publication, which Karl Marx published in 1845, it outlined his critique of the German philosopher Feuerbach, and he present the key ideas that would later be developed in his larger works. So the content of these 11 theses on Feuerbach includes sensuous human activity. Marx criticized Feuerbach for his materialism, which he saw as too abstract and passive. Feuerbach focused on a human perception, senses human experience, but Marx argued that sensuous human activity is what truly shapes reality. He also do some practical critical activity. He also talked about the essence of man. He also talked about alienation as religion as a form of human alienation, and alienation is rooted in the material conditions of society. Marx criticized both idealists and traditional materialist philosophers also. And Marx argued that the human thought and consciousness arise from material conditions and a social practice. So the task of philosophy is not only to interpret the world, but also to change it through revolutionary practice. Okay, it was what he also talked about changing circumstances. He rejected the notion that circumstances are fixed and unchangeable. He was asserting that revolutionary praxis can transform societies. And Feuerbach sees religion as a projection of human essence. But Marx agreed to his perception, but he at the same time insists that the religious root lie in the social and the economic conditions of life. And he was believing in the materialist conception of history. He suggested that the social and economic conditions, rather than abstract ideas, it drive historical changes. And he also talked about philosophers, that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. But what is the main point? The point is to change it. So this was all about the 11 Theses on Feuerbach. The other publication was about the poverty of philosophy, which got published in 1847. And this poverty of philosophy is a critique of the Proudhon's book, The Philosophy of Poverty. The book which was written by the Proudhon, that was The Philosophy of Poverty. He actually criticized that, and he wrote a publication which was The Poverty of Philosophy. He reversed that title. And what was the content of this Poverty of Philosophy? It was based on critique of Proudhon's method. Marx criticized Proudhon for his dialectical method, which he considered superficial and confused. Proudhon's attempt to apply Hegelian dialect to economics is, in Marx's view, inconsistent, and it lacked the scientific rigor. He talked about value and labor. Marx addressed Proudhon's theory of value, arguing that Proudhon failed to understand the labor theory of value properly. He believing that Proudhon's approach is flawed and it doesn't grasp the social relation that embedded in a capitalist mode of production. And there is also, he talked about economic contradictions. He criticized Prudence for seeing economic contradictions like use value and exchange value is resolvable through reforms. Marx believed that it cannot be resolved through reform. It is only the revolutionary change that can bring change to the capitalist system. And also he talked about the division of labor. Prudence sees the division of labor as an issue that can be managed within the framework of the private property, but Marx argued that it is a fundamental feature of capitalism that perpetuates the class division and exploitation. And means that much of his philosophy actually critiqued the Prudence method. He also talked about the property and exploitation. He rejected the Prudence idea of balancing property relations to achieve social justice. Marx argued that exploitation is inherent in the system of the private property and the wage labor, which cannot be reformed away. And also, Marx discussed the economic laws of capitalism, emphasizing that they are not natural or eternal, but these are the social construct that reflect the power dynamics and the relations of production in society. So he insists that understanding these laws is essential for transforming society. Then the other publication of the Karl Marx is the Class Struggle in France. The Class Struggle in France got published in 1850, and this was the detailed analysis of the political and social development in France following the 1848 revolution. Much of the content of the Class Struggle in France he examined the 1848 French Revolution, including the February Revolution that led to the establishment of the Second Republic. So he was talking about the class struggle and the political movements. Okay, what were the class struggle and political movements he talked about? Marx analyzed the different social classes involved in the revolution, including the bourgeoisie class, the proletarian, and the peasantry class. He highlighted how the interest and action of these classes influenced the course of the revolution. He also talked about the role of the working class, that how it take part in a revolution, and how much potential the working class has for the revolution. And also he talked about the role of the state. That Marx discussed the role of the state in a class struggle, he emphasizing that how the state apparatus was used by the bourgeoisie to maintain their dominance and suppress the revolutionary movements. He also talked about the revolutionary potential. He explored the revolutionary potential of the working class and its ability to challenge the bourgeoisie order. He critiqued the limitations of the working class movement and failure to achieve a successful revolution due to lack of the coherent political strategy and a leadership. So this was all about the class struggle in France, which got published in 1850. There is also other publication which is known as the Contribution of the Critique of the Political Economy, which got published in 1859. This contribution of the critique of the political economy was about it is an important word that lays the groundwork for his seminar text, that was the Das Kapital. So it was published in 1859, and much of this was focusing on the discussion that revolved around the commodity. Marx discussed the nature of commodity, focusing on their dual nature, that was the use value and the exchange value. He also talked about the value and labor. And Marx elaborated on his labor theory of value, which posited that the value of commodity is determined by the amount of socially necessary labor time required for its production. He critiqued the classical economist's understanding of value and proposes a more nuanced view of how value is created and realized in a capitalism. He also talked about the surplus value, which Marx introduced, which is central to his critique of capitalism also. He explained that how the surplus value arises from the difference between the value produced by the labor and the value of labor power purchased by the capitalist. He also do a critique of the classical economist, as he studied Adam Smith at the British Museum. So he do a critique of the classical economists Adam Smith and David Ricardo. He argued that their theories do not adequately address the dynamics of capital accumulation and the role of labor in generating value. And also he talked about the historical materialism. He talked about the economic base of society, the mode of production that shapes the political and the ideological superstructure. He also talked about the dialectical method. He uses this method to uncover the underlying social relation and the economic structure that drive the historical change. And also, these publications, much of the Karl Marx publication was focusing on the critique of the capitalism. So we can say that the broader theory or the broader concept of the Karl Marx is known as the critique it. These are most of the part of the Karl Marx broader philosophy, that is the critique of capitalism. Okay, then the other publication was the critique of the Gotha problem, which was published in 1975. The critique of the Gotha problem, which was written by Karl Marx, it is a critical examination of the draft program of the German Workers' Party, which later became the Democratic Party, which was presented at the Gotha Congress. That's why it is known as the critique of the Gotha program, because it was a draft program of the German Workers' Party, which later became the Social Democratic Party, but it was presented at the Gotha Congress. Much of the content of this critique was that it actually do an overview of the Gotha program. Marx critique focused on both the general principles and the specific demands of the program. And this critique of the programs, they actually do critique of the program theoretical foundation. He argued that the program failed to adequately address the nature of transition from capitalism to socialism and the principles of the scientific socialism also. He also gave the concept of fair distribution. Marx objects to the program's emphasis on fair distribution of wealth, arguing that this concept is vague and lacks a concrete understanding of how socialism should be realized. He believed that focusing on a fair distribution without addressing the underlying social relations of production, it is insufficient. So this was all about the Karl Marx publications, which was the publication he worked himself, and this was all about these major contributions. Then the Karl Marx political philosophy. Karl Marx political philosophy was profoundly influenced by the Hegelian philosophy. When he was studying at the University of Berlin, when he was studying philosophy, he came under the influence of the Hegelian philosophy, because it was at that time it was heavily influenced by that. And what was actually the Hegelian philosophy? Hegelian and the Karl Marx philosophy, they both were different from each other in the sense that they both talk about the dialect, but the Karl Marx dialect was more focusing on matter. Karl Marx was believing that the center of dialect is matter, but Hegel believed that the center of the dialect is the idea, it's abstract. Means that he gave more importance to the abstract, to the understanding something in our mind. Means that he believed that there is something wrong in our understanding of things. There is something wrong in our mind, in our ideas. So if we want to have a change, we have to work on our ideas, on our understandings. But on the other hand, the Marx believed that this is not about the ideas or the thinking or the understanding, but it is about the matter, because the Karl Marx was a materialist thinker, so he was focusing more on the material things, have and have not class. That one class have the uneven access to the material resources. On the other hand, there is other class who is lacking even the basic necessity. This is what the Karl Marx talk about. And then he was committed to creation of the rational world order for emancipation of whole community, whole humanity. Karl Marx and other Enlightenment thinkers, although Karl Marx was focusing on emancipation of humanity, which was also the objective of the other Enlightenment thinkers also. But what distinguished the Karl Marx from the other Enlightenment thinkers, that Karl Marx Karl Marx and Enlightenment thinkers both believe in freedom, but Karl Marx believed only way to ideal freedom is communism, which is that there should be no private property, no class conflict, no politics. But on the other hand, the Enlightenment thinkers, they approve revolutions like the French Revolution. They were believing that the political liberation, the political freedom and the social freedom, it can bring change in society. But the Karl Marx believing that this political liberation is something superficial. It is a partial freedom. If we want to have full freedom, what we have to do is to start from the very base of our society, that is the economic base of our society. So we have to change the economic structure. And to change the economic structure, what is needed? That is the revolution, the communist revolution. There should have another system of the economy that should be based on a communism. Means that there should be no private property, no class conflict, and no politics. It means that he was believing that every individual should work according to their capacity and should gain according to their need. And he believed that real freedom is possible only in the state of communism. And he was disapproval of the French Revolution and a recognition of the individual rights promises of the human freedom, unlike to the Enlightenment thinkers. And this is how Karl Marx is considered different from the Enlightenment thinker, because Enlightenment thinkers were believing in the political liberations, but in case of the Karl Marx, he was believing that these are just a partial freedom. It can never realize into a free state where there will be equality there, because he was believing that if in order to change a society, we have to start from the very root of the problem, and that is about the economic system. In communist society, he thought a state would wither away, means that state would fade away. There will be no need of state. What will happen, because in communist society, which he was predicting, which he believed as something inevitable or something unavoidable, he was believing that the state would be, there would be no concept of state, because it will be something which will be no longer needed by the individual, because everything will be evenly distributed among the members of the society. People will work according to their capacity and will get according to their needs. So there will be no concept of private property. So of course, when there is no concept of private property, it means there will be no conflict, because Karl Marx believed that the root of the conflict is actually the ownership, the private ownership of different things, the private ownership of private property. So when there is no concept of private property, so of course it will lead to the to the conflict-free society, and which will then lead to the no need of state, no need of politics. So there will be no room for state and politics, as everything will be evenly distributed among the members of society. Most of the critics accuse Karl Marx as of utopian philosopher, because he believed that what Karl Marx has portrayed as a communist society is something never achievable, is something unpractical. Okay, then the Karl Marx political philosophy. Karl Marx philosophy consolidate three intellectual traditions. He combined these three intellectual traditions and led to his unique political philosophy. Now, what was the combination of his three intellectual traditions? That include the German idealism, also the classical economist, and the French socialism. What is the German idealism? The German idealism is a philosophical movement that emerged in Germany in late 18th and early 19th century, and it focused on the role of ideas, consciousness, and nature of reality. One of the key figure of the German idealism is Hegel, who we have just discussed here, who was more believing on ideas and believed that the center of dialect is idea, something abstract and something wrong in our understanding. The core concept of German idealism is that this gave the concept of dialect, the idea that reality and thought develop through contradictions and their resolutions. But they were believing in absolute idealism, means that the reality is fundamentally shaped by and ultimately reducible to ideas or concepts. For example, Hegel posited that the development of ideas is the reflection of development of world itself. And the French socialism refers to the variety of the socialist and social reformist movement in France during the 19th century. And the core concepts of the French socialism associated with the critique of capitalism, that the French socialists criticized the capitalist system for its inherent inequalities and exploitation, and they sought to address issues such as poverty, inequality, and the concentration of wealth. And also they were providing a kind of idealistic and utopian visions of a future society based on a communal living, cooperative work, and shared resources. And also they were talking about reform and revolution. Some French socialists pursue gradual reforms within the existing system. Others advocated for revolutionary change to establish a more equitable social order. And the other, that was the classical economy, which also has impact on the Marx philosophy, that the classical economist is an economic theory that emerged in late 18th and early 19th century in Britain. And it focused on free market, the role of competition, the mechanism of value and distribution. Some of the key figures include Adam Smith, which just studied that Karl Marx studied his Adam Smith at the British Museum, and then later on he gave his publication, which was named as Capital, which consists of 3 volumes. So what were the key concepts of the classical economists? They studied the labor theory of value, and the theory that the value of commodity is determined by the amount of the socially necessary labor time for its production. This concept was central to a classical economist. And also they were talking about invisible hand, the metaphor which they use to describe that how individuals pursue their own self-interest unintentionally contribute to the overall economic good through a market mechanism. Also they talk about the capital accumulations. Classical economists analyzed that how capital is accumulated and how it influences economic growth and distribution. So how the German idealism, classical economists, and French socialism lead to a synthesis of the Karl Marx philosophy. From German idealism, Marx adopted the dialectical method, apply it to a material condition and class relation rather than the abstract ideas. Remember that the German idealist, one of the example, for example, Hegel, he actually applied the method, the dialect method, to understand the ideas, but in case of the Karl Marx, he adopted this method of dialect, but rather to apply it on abstract ideas, he moved to the material conditions. And also he rejected the idealistic focus on consciousness as the primary driver of historical change, and instead he focused on material and the economic factors. Then how the classical economists shaped the intellectual tradition of the Karl Marx. The classical economist, in case of the classical economists, Marx used the labor theory of value and other economic concepts from the classical economists to critique capitalism. And he expanded on these ideas to analyze it, how the capital accumulation and exploitation they function within the capitalism. So he took the concepts of the classical economists like related to the labor theory of value and other concepts related to a classical economist, and he actually extended these concepts and built on his work on these concepts regarding the capital accumulation and exploitation of the proletarian class. And the other intellectual tradition include which was named as a French socialism. Marx shared concern about inequality and exploitation, but he critiqued the reformist and utopian approaches of the French socialists, and he developed a more systematic critique of capitalism based on the dynamics of class struggle and the contradictions inherent in a capitalist system. So this was all about the intellect, that how the Karl Marx philosophy consolidate these three intellectual traditions. And this was how the German idealism, the classical economists, and the French socialism leads to the Karl Marx unique philosophy. In case of the French socialism, as it more focused on inherent inequalities and exploitations and utopian visions, and it was also focusing on concentration of wealth. Karl Marx actually used these concepts, but he was believing that he tried to develop more systematic critique of capitalism rather than to focus just on accumulation of wealth. He was focusing to have more systematic understanding of the system and to understand the dynamics of class struggle and also the contradiction inherent in the capitalist system. Means that he delved more deeply than the French socialists to understand the capitalist system. So this was how these three intellectual traditions, they were consolidated to form the Karl Marx unique political philosophy. Okay. Then the other works of the Karl Marx is the political philosophy. In case of the Karl Marx political philosophy, there are two types of writings. When we look at the Karl Marx political philosophy, we come across two types of writings. The first is the young humanistic approach, and the other is the mature Marx writing. The young humanistic approach is more associated with the German ideology. It was more influential of the Hegelian philosophy, which we have just discussed. The German ideology was more associated with the young humanistic approach, and it was focusing more on the human alienation. It was focusing how to achieve human emancipation, what should be the solution for exploitation, and so on. It developed concepts like alienation, objectification of labor, human emancipation, and communism. It was developed through his engagement with the Hegel publication, which was known as the Phenomenology of Spirit, which was written by Hegel. So when he come across with this publication, then he published these concepts. So Marx was more focusing on a human freedom, on human emancipation. He was discussing the concepts of the communism, and this young humanistic approach is considered a kind of immature work by the critics, because much of this young humanistic approach work of the Karl Marx was considered utopian, something unpractical. But in case of the mature Marx writings, which were the later work of the Karl Marx, these were more focusing on the scientific approach. Karl Marx then move away from Hegelian philosophy and then focus on more mature writings. Marx focused on revolution, and he discussed the concepts like capital and the Communist Manifesto. This was all when he talked about revolutionary change, like how to bring revolutionary change. He talked about this Communist Manifesto and also discussed some economic concepts like capital. This was all classified as the Marx mature writings. Okay, then the criticisms to Marx philosophy. Although Karl Marx philosophy has been praised, and so he was considered one of the most influential thinker of the 19th and whole of the 20th century. No other thinker in the history of political thought has shaped the historical events and revolutions and changes that Marx writings and philosophy did. But still, there are some criticisms which was brought to the Marx philosophy. He actually believed the much of the critics believed that the economic determinism which he discussed, which was based on his base and the superstructure model, it is only the economy or the economic structure that determine all the other aspects of the society. Much of the critics believe that this economic determinism is based on a faulty premise. They are believing that it is a kind of reductionist argument. What does this mean by reductionist argument? Reductionism refers to an error in explanation in which the empirical data about association found among the smaller scale units of analysis, they are greatly overgeneralized and treated as the evidence for statements among relationship among much larger units. Means that it is a fallacy of non-equivalence. It involves a mismatch of the units of analysis and imprecise reasoning about evidence. So it means that the researcher, he do research on a small units of analysis, and then he overgeneralize it and use this research as a evidence to understand the relationship among the larger units. So means that the Karl Marx was focusing on a single society or maybe on one aspect of a single society, but he was overgeneralizing it to all types of societies. That in all types of society there is this base which actually determine the superstructure, that is the economic structure that determine all the other aspect, all the non-material culture of the society. This is what the critics believe, that it is based on the reductionist argument. And the other thing, that the theory of revolution, which Karl Marx has given, it was criticized that it was not something inevitable, it was not something unavoidable, because the society in which we are living today, it hasn't passed through that phase of revolution. But what had happened with the capitalist system, that they had actually adopted the principles of the welfare system, welfare state, and they had improved the conditions of the labor by limiting their wage hours, by setting a minimum threshold salary for them, and also to ease their work conditions by providing them legal protections, and also by providing them some social benefits. So it is actually the concept of welfare state which emerged and which overcome the flaws of the capitalism. So the theory of revolution, it then become failure because the society never passed through that revolution. And the other criticism which was drawn, that the communist revolution historically proved to be failure. Even those society who passed through this communist revolution which Karl Marx was predicting, in that society it doesn't cause any betterment. It doesn't lead to any betterment of society. In fact, it leads to a more authoritarian government. It leads to worse conditions of our society. I mean, the conditions become even more worse than a capitalist. So this was all that how the critics view the Marx philosophy and how they draw criticism to it. Okay, Karl Marx philosophy has also been criticized by some others in different way, like according to Wilfred Pareto, who say that if one read the Marx philosophy, it will be like that when someone say they were birds, the birds would cry, no, we are mice. When someone say they were mice, they protested they were birds. He was actually trying to pointing out that the Marx philosophy is a kind of complex philosophy, and there are various interpretations possible of his work. So if one make one kind of interpretation, the other interpretation is also true. Means that if someone said they were birds, the birds would cry, no, we are mice. So when someone said they were mice, they probably said they were birds. Means that whatever interpretation you do of the Marx philosophy, the opposite is also true. And on the other hand, the Hannah Arendt, who criticized the Marx philosophy, and he say that if Marx seems to be forgotten, it's not because Marx thought and the method he introduced have been abandoned, but rather because they have become so axiomatic that their origin is no longer remembered. Means that the Karl Marx philosophy is so deeply dwelt in our society, is so deeply rooted or needed by the society of our time, that even that the slogans of the Marx philosophy, which is well known by most of the people, if you ask from that people about the origin of that slogan, there will be rare people who will have knowledge about the origin and the purpose, or the context in which the Marx has raised that slogan. So it means that there will be a time when the Marx philosophy will be so much read and written that most of the people, they will not know about the origin of it. And then the Karl Marx major theories, in which he talk about the capitalist system and all of his Marxist philosophy, that is the theory of historical materialism, in which he talk about that the historical exploitation of the the working class by the capitalist class, and he talk about the contradictions that prevail, that drive by the historical change. And he also talked about the class conflict, the have and have not class, and also talked about the theory of evolution. It is the alienation, the feeling of alienation of labor, the worker from their labor and also from their product. This is all the theories which we will discuss in our coming lectures. And also he talked about the labor theory of value. In addition to these major theories, he also talked about the theory of the subsistence wage. He also talked about the theory of surplus value. This is all the theory which is closely associated with these major theories. Okay, then the Karl Marx was philosophy. When we look in the Karl Marx philosophy, it feels like he was influenced by the Rousseau philosophy. Also Hegel philosophy, we discussed the German idealism, and he was also influenced by the Charles Darwin theory. And Adam Smith, the classical economist we just discussed, that he studied all the philosophy of all these sociologists and some of the economists also, and the Charles Fourier. These were those who inspired Karl Marx. And later on, after when Karl Marx published his philosophy, these were those who was actually influenced by the Karl Marx philosophy. So these include the John Ravis, the Antonio Althusser, Gramsci, Mao, and Lenin. These all were those who are known as the neo-Marxists because they continue the Marx philosophy but with some addition and modification. So they are known as the neo-Marxists. These are those who were inspired by the Marx philosophy. Okay, then at the end we will discuss that Karl Marx died, that how the Karl Marx philosophy was then ended. Karl Marx was died on 14 March 1883. He was died in England. He was buried in Highgate Cemetery in London. And Marx was died in 1883, and his daughter was died in 1882. This was all about the Karl Marx introduction, the occupational history, the educational background, some of his publications with Engel, some of his other publications, the overview of his political thoughts, and also some his intellectual ideas. This is all about the Karl Marx. So this was the end of our lecture. Thank you so much for watching. Leave your questions in the comment section below, and like, share, and subscribe our channel for latest lectures. Thank you.